And we're going to continue our study in the book of Ruth. We're going to go back and visit chapter 1 again. We looked at chapter 1 initially from the standpoint of Naomi, talking about the basic situation that she faced and Elimelech's family faced, verses 1 through 6. And then we looked from verse 7 right on through verse 22, Naomi being a wounded believer. And we talked about some of those aspects. But I intentionally left out sections of chapter 1 because it just made more sense to divide it in this way, to go back rather than trying to mix and mingle as we went through. So as we look at verses 3 through 22, I'm not going to read all of those at one time as we go through it. We're going to visit the other two ladies that were a part of chapter 1, Orpah and Ruth. And as we look at these two ladies, the book begins to shift from just Naomi to Orpah, and then especially to Ruth. It begins to move that focus. First 6 verses, Elimelech, and basically Naomi, because she was the only one out of the family left alive. And then her 2 daughters-in-law begin to pick up and move through the book. And we really don't know a whole lot about these ladies and their previous lives in Moab. We do know that Moab was a heathen country. It worshipped idols. It did not join in with Israel and actually fought against them. Judges tells us that Moab actually had invaded parts of Israel, probably Judah, Bethlehem area, even possibly. We don't know, but they had invaded. And they were a on and off again enemy of Israel. But if the meaning of their names is any indication of the type of people they were, we can get a little bit out of that. Orpah, which is usually translated as a word meaning back of the neck or stiff neck. In other words, Orpah could well have been a very strong-willed and probably willful child individual. Ruth means friendship. So Ruth, evidently by her name, if name is an indication of anything, and we've already seen this with Mahlon and Chilion, sick and pining, they lived up to their name. So it's quite possible that Orpah and Ruth were named that because of just the type of baby and child they were. However, all this is conjecture. I can't prove any of this, but if their names mean anything. And some commentators have even suggested that these two ladies were sisters. Once again, we don't know for sure. Possible, but just as possible that they were not. No relation whatsoever. So as we look at these two ladies, the question that comes up to us is that in the midst of a confused, chaotic, and dangerous time, with some possibly bad decisions being made by God's people, Elimelech leaving Israel, going into Moab, what in the world's God doing in all this? Now, we do know that these two ladies' introduction into the lives of Elimelech's family was, in part at least, a providential good. And is especially going to end up being a providential good for Naomi and for David's family. But as we think about this idea of a providential good, this brings some questions to our mind to think about. And not only in light of our passage, but just in general. When we think about life experiences, and we think about the good, in quotes, God has for us in our situations. So, do you think we would ever have known of Ruth if Elimelech had not gone to Moab? No right or wrong answer. What do you think? Think we would have ever known of her? Quite possibly not. Could God have used a judgment, the famine, to bring about the circumstance for Ruth to learn of Jehovah and become an ancestor of David? What do you think? Could he have used the famine as a tool to bring about the circumstance for Ruth to learn of Jehovah and become an ancestor of David. Yeah? See that? It's all kind of a shrug as maybe, maybe not. But it's questions that comes to our mind when we think about God working providentially. What do you think would have happened to David's line if Ruth had not been included? Would there still have been a history of David's family without Ruth? Yeah, probably. Would it have been the same? We don't know. But probably there would have been a line going still to David. Is it possible that God allowed all of these things to happen? The famine, the deaths of Elimelech and his 2 sons, no grandbabies, the return of food, all of this to place Ruth into the line of David. See some nods, see some people looking to me like, you tell me, I ain't committing to nothing here, you know.
Well, could this have been a way for him to start bringing in, let's say, the outsiders? Since, they were forbidden to marry these women, but for some reason
They did anyway.
they did. And God's plan was for everybody to be included, and maybe this was just the beginning of getting everybody included.
Okay. Yeah, very good point. This could have been one of those initial steps, because there are several places in the Old Testament where outsiders, and I like that phrase, outsiders were brought in and included into the history of Israel and even into the line of Messiah. We're going to see a phrase near the end of this little book that, to me, I've read it I don't know how many times, but stuck out to me the other day, and it's going to be an interesting discussion when we get to that. But this was an outsider that was an insider, or an insider that was an outsider. It's kind of 6 one, half does the other. When we see the phrase, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. So to think about, could God have allowed all of this? People dying, famines, kids not being born, and food to come to back into an area for people to move and change, and there be migration and so forth. Could God do that? To simply bring a person to a particular place? We feel yes. But when we say that, and you think about all the myriad of things that have happened, okay, you mean Elimelech was expendable. Mahlon and Chilion was expendable. We can just move them out of the way. Then you say, well, it sounds a little extreme.
Yeah.
Don't, and to use our language today, well, didn't Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion, don't they have some rights?
We're all expendable.
We're all expendable. That makes us all feel better. But in a sense, when we talk about the providence of God, and we're going to look at the providence of God, we're going to look at the will of God, the providence of God, and the will of God involved in the providence of God over the next couple of weeks with this. Because the reason I say that we'll get through all of that today. But can we also assume that through all of the experiences we encounter, now we've been focused on Naomi and Elimelech and Ruth and Orpah and all that, but can we assume that through all of the experiences we encounter, God is there and will bring a good to us and His plan?
Yes, He told us so.
Okay. Got an amen corner over here. The rest of everybody else is kind of quiet on this. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, older. Yeah, I don't. But it's one of those questions because we want to say yes. God will do that.
Isaiah 28 says.
Yeah, the Bible states that.
Yeah.
But what, and I think this is the reason why we have so much silence that comes with that type of statement. We think, all that's happened to me, God's got a good in it for me? You mean, couldn't he have done this a little bit different, for crying out loud? And good, I don't think I've seen any good in some of the things. You know, we begin to compartmentalize. And God's here, but God's not here. Or God did this, or God didn't allow that. God is... But as we read Ruth, there is such an intermingling of the providence and the sovereignty and the working of God in all that was happening. Elimelech kicking off. Mahlon and Chilion kicking off. Ruth and Orpah, both of them being barren. All of that to bring Ruth into the line of David, into Israel, into a relationship with Jehovah, into the line of David, and thus into the line of Messiah. And it can be almost a little overwhelming when we look at our lives and think about some of the things that have happened to us, and may still be happening for all I know. And you mean to tell me, Billy boy, that God's got a good in this for me? I thought all of this type of junk came from the devil. Where in the world is God in this? How we answer those 5 questions that I just posed to you informs the messages that we can learn from this passage, 3 through 22, and right on through the book. We're going to see this over and over again unfold. About how God can and will bring good. That's the sticking point. Yeah, I know God is there, but there ain't nothing good in what I'm going to, you know. But that God can and will bring good to us in our life circumstances. Now, we've talked about several themes that's going to be in the book of Ruth. Providence of God, His hand in causality. And with the providence, the sovereignty of God in the affairs of people. In other words, God sticking His hands, God sticking His nose into our business, whether we ask Him to or not. And the choice of God to use the most unlikely people to impact His plans in the world. You got a nobody family, Elimelech, from a nowhere town, Bethlehem, and a nowhere woman, Ruth, fitting in to God's plan. The choice of God to use the most unlikely people. Paul said it this way: God hasn't chosen many wise, many powerful, many great in the eyes of the world, but He's chosen the weak, the despised, to confuse the minds of those who are world-centered. We see this exampled in the life of Ruth. So let's look at some of the general lessons, some general principles for our lives in this section, verse 3 through 22. And we'll talk about it under the heading, the will of God. And so we'll start off with this. Okay. So, the book of Ruth shows God's will working with, through, in spite of, and over. And you could add any other adverbs along with that. The actions of people by His foreknowledge. This working by foreknowledge is what we call providence. Look at it this way. It's like the piecing together of persons, events, and actions to accomplish a point decided in the mind of God. This is the first good that was in front of Naomi, and she should have seen it. But she didn't. And ultimately came in front of Ruth. That God is going to piece together the people, the events, the actions that happen in our lives to accomplish a point decided in His mind. Like looking at a piece of, a 10,000 piece puzzle. Every piece fits, but do mercy. When you start looking at all that, you wonder, how in the world does all this fit? But every piece has its place. So in our lives, God has and is moving the pieces of events, actions, people's lives to help achieve a point that is in His mind. What do you think about that?
Well, without faith, it's called coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
And without faith, we're called fools for believing it's anything but that.
Yep.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah, wishful thinking. It's luck, coincidence, all of that stuff. And we use, boy, that's all really, I don't know how you can be so lucky. Really, how the providence of God is working. But what about a sinner? Yeah, providence of God works for sinners too. He makes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Remember Jesus saying those things? Providence works. Moab had food. They weren't under a famine, but they were not God's people. They were a heathen people. But God's people were in a famine. You would think it ought to be reversed. God's people ought to always have everything poured out all over them, But it would make it easy. And the Lord said in the early chapter of Judges that He was going to leave those people, those nations and those tribes, those groups in and around Israel as a test to see if they really would follow Him or not. So yeah, didn't make it too easy. God disciplines all those He receives, Paul said in the book of Hebrews. It's discipline sometimes. Discipline not because we are so bad, but discipline to help teach us and train us and guide us, to prepare us for an event that is out there somewhere in the mind of God that you and I are going to intersect with. And in the statement with a preposition is always not a good English thing, but I didn't excel in English, so.
We're spelling.
I know you'd have never guessed that if I hadn't told you, So as we think about this, and it will get complicated. It will get complicated. But it's one of the most comforting things if we can grasp it, that we can have in our lives. God is working to accomplish His will or a point He has decided. Now, the kicker in that is that it's a point He has decided, not a point that we have decided. We decide a lot of points of what we're going to do. But like James said, what is your life? And he's talking to those who said, next year we're going to do this and do that. And we do that. We do that. We plan for retirement. All you young folks, this young lady right here needs to be planning for her retirement right now, if you believe everything that's being told on television. And probably it's true. You need to think about that. How often does she think about retirement? Oh, I didn't think. Yeah, I'm just asking. Today she's thinking about it. Today. But we make our plans and we do that. But so often what we forget to do is to think about the points that God has decided for us that will occur and happen through our life experiences. And that's where the rub comes in. I want Him to do what I want. I want Him to help me reach my point. And God says, well, you know, I will as long as that reaches mine. But if your plan don't reach my plan, guess what? Yours is probably not going to happen. My plan, my point, is going to be reached.
Yeah, then why bother?
Then why bother? That's an excellent question. Well, I have that right down here. Why bother? Yeah. Why bother? Does the providential working of God excuse us from obeying Him? No, it doesn't excuse us. Providence, P-R-O-V, and I'll do that. Providence isn't I think that might be a neat. Fatalism. Like I said, English was not my, nor math, nor all the things that we're supposed to learn were not my strong points. But providence isn't fatalism. When you think about the context of the book of Ruth, Judah as a tribe had sinned, and famine came. There was a consequence. Elimelech probably shouldn't have gone to Moab, and it probably wasn't the will of God. But if that's true, then for their failure, they never saw Judah again. And you remember Moses, after hitting the rock the second time, when the Lord told him, said, "I'll speak to it. You've already hit it once." And the shadow, the copy, the type was Christ being broken, and when he died, came forth living abundant water. So when he told Moses, now all you got to do is speak to the rock and you'll have the water, Moses said, no, and have I got it? You know, he just started frailing on the rock. And the Lord said, okay, stupid. You can't fix it, you know. Even if your name is Moses, you can't fix it sometimes, you know. He said, for this, you'll see the land of Canaan, but you ain't going to set foot in it. Moses had led those people for 40 years. And all he could do was get on the mountain and look across Jordan and see it. He never set foot in what he led that entire group of people to have. So when we think, why try? Because there is an expectation from the part of God that we have a responsibility. We don't see the end from the beginning. He does. But he expects us to be obedient, to trust him, to believe him, to obey him. And if we don't, you know, we're going to suffer the consequence of it. It's not fatalism. What will be, will be. No? And in my notes, I have a little diagram that I'm not even going to try to put on this board because it looks more like my handwriting. It's just unintelligible. And we will talk about it a little bit. But from here to here, this being me and you, and this being whatever it might be, the point of God, maybe death, point, whatever, this thing just kind of goes all around. What will be is looked at it from God's point of view, but we have all of this stuff that we're doing, and it's the providence of God that is working in all of that mess that we have in our life, that as a believer to bring us here, even if it's just at the point of death. You know, because it's appointed a man once to die, and then the judgment. So, you know, providence is going to bring you to that point. You ain't going to live forever. Not in this, anyway. Even though scientists are now saying that we might possibly live 500 years, you're still going to die. You're still going to get to that point.
What about the one that God knows? You know, he knows all.
Mm-hmm.
He knows the one that's not going to get saved.
Yeah.
Does he chase him that whole time, still knowing the end result that he's not going to get, but he keeps keeps chasing him?
Yeah. He does.
Well, I guess just like what we're reading.
Yeah. Yeah, you take, let's say this is a sinner. God sees,
And he knows he's not going.
yeah.
to put him in
And over here, this is death and hell. And God knows. He ain't going to make it. He is never going to surrender to me. God knows this. He knew whether you were going to get saved or not. You didn't. He did. But from the time of birth to the time of death, when there's no longer an opportunity to change, God is working. He makes the rain fall on the just and the unjust. Why? To help the unjust to realize that He is God over everything. But as Romans 1 says, so oftentimes, instead of worshiping the Creator, we worship the creature. You know, we go back to the evolution and all this other stuff rather than worshiping the creature. But God gives through... How many with this sinner, how many Christian people might he or she encounter along this 40, 50, 70, 90 years of life? How many television programs, even if it is Big Smiley, you know. How many times they've been to church? How many times have they had an opportunity to pick up a Bible in a hotel room? All of those are pursuits. And when they get over here, and it smells a little more like sulfur than they were thinking it was going to smell when they died. Well, why did you do this to me? I have been after you all through your life. And you refused. You were here. I knew you were going there. But you made every choice to not come to me. We'll say, what now? Could they have gotten saved? Well, sure they could have. And God would have known that. Let's say sinner, instead of sinner A, who ends up baking in the lake, let's say sinner B, he's bottomed out in drugs, he's, messed up his life, he's just done all kind of things. Right down here, when it looks like he's at his very lowest, he comes to Olivet. And he's just sitting in church and he's not, I don't even know why I'm here. Good grief. At least it feels a little warmer than it does outside. And he hears the gospel message and he gets saved. God knew. And He worked maybe even 25 degrees outside as a providence of God to bring somebody to a place to recognize or to encounter some opportunity to hear a message. Like I said, it gets really complicated. It gets really kind of involved when we think about it in this way. But it happens.
It could be like 9/11 or tragedy in their life or anything like that.
Yeah, 9/11 for all, churches filled up after 9/11 for a couple of weeks. They get over here. Well, why am I in hell? Well, you didn't do anything when you went to church. You had an opportunity to believe in me and you refused it. But it was an opportunity. It was a providential opportunity. You mean God allowed all those people to die? Yeah, He did. All 3,000 of them. Yeah, He did. Well, I thought the devil did do that. The devil don't do anything without God knowing about it. And there were providences. That 9/11 is a turning point in my thinking, and you know how much that's worth. That and $5 to get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. That's how much my thinking is worth. But that was probably, if we could see it, was probably a corner moving the whole world toward an Antichrist. Because things happen in our country and around the world as a result of that we've never even believed was going to happen. Laws passed, things happen.
Global event.
Global.
Basically.
Yeah.
Whereas Katrina was
More of a local thing. Yeah, more of a local thing. And I think there were thousands of providences there, but probably more local. Although We can't see exactly how God worked that, but probably more local, yeah. A tornado, a hurricane, things of that nature. Still, providence is working. God knew what Elimelech and his family would do. And whether that was something they were supposed to do or not. They made the decision. But they providentially became the instrument to bring Ruth to Jehovah and into the family out of which would be born David. They became a providential tool in the hand of God. Now, this gives us an assurance that God is working no matter what any may do. And even though we may this morning feel as lost as Naomi when she got back to Bethlehem, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. She's just, You may feel that way this morning. Look for the Ruth in what and where you are. Look for the Ruth. Naomi didn't see that. She's trying to get Ruth to go home. Get out of here. I ain't got nothing for you. Going back to your gods and going back to where you might have a chance at a husband. I ain't got nothing for you. That's a believer in Jehovah. I'm saying that, by the way. That's what she couldn't see. The good that God had right in front of her with Ruth. She couldn't see it. That's why I say, look for the Ruth. You have gone through things in your life. You may be going through things in your life. Look for the Ruth. I don't see no Ruth. Well, maybe not looking. Because if we believe God is working, there is a Ruth. Think back in your lives over the last year. How many things have occurred or went on that you look back on now and you are in a different place? And it's a better place spiritually for you. Maybe it's better mentally and physically too, financially. I don't know. But spiritually, it's a better place. That's a Ruth. What gave you that Ruth? What gave you that good? It was the providence of God working. And you look back and say, oh, wow. Now, I'm going to pick on Barbara. Because she had a situation in her work experience that was not the most pleasant. And she was talking to my wife about it. My wife needed somebody at her job. She has now changed jobs, and now she's working at a place that, if this wasn't on, I could say a whole lot about, but my wife is still working there, so I won't, you know what I'm saying? Talk to me at the end of May. But it's a better situation now for you individually. You're still working a lot, because I know you're still working a lot. It's still hard. She's not surrounded by saints up there either, by any stretch. But perhaps my wife was a Ruth for you in that situation. Now, I don't know whether she thinks that right now or not. You may have to talk to her to be sure, That's why I said I was going to pick on her a little bit. But, see, there was a Ruth. There was a Ruth. How many times have you, in a conversation, you come back and you look back, I sure was glad I talked to so-and-so. Ruth? Well, the name won't Ruth. Well, no, The will of God, well, let me say this. One of the things that I have realized in the last year or two, one of the safest prayers to pray in times of difficulty and hurt and wrong, whatever it might be, is this: God, accomplish all your will. It's a prayer of commitment, even in the midst of whatever is happening, from a personal failure to things going on around your life that you have no control of. God, accomplish all your will. That's a safe, when I say safe, it's a genuine commitment. I have a lot of things I want to pray about. Lord, I'd really love for you to do this, that, and the other. This is what I'd like to do, but Lord, accomplish all your will, because I don't know what he has decided in that circumstance in my life. I don't know what he has decided. But Lord, I want you to accomplish all your will, and by that I'm saying wherever I need to fit in to accomplish that will fit me in. Now this is what I really wish you would do, but accomplish your will. That's the first thing. That's a practical application of thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The prayer of our Lord. And it's a good prayer. It's a safe prayer for you in your spiritual strength. But when you pray that, you are surrendering yourself to the working of God. And when you surrender yourself to the working of God, God's providence is on the scene, man. It's on the scene for you. And the will of God isn't dependent upon the perfect obedience of individuals. In other words, it's not name dependent. You don't have to have Billy to be able to learn the Word of God. Well, if we didn't have Billy, we couldn't learn the Word of God. Oh, no. God was teaching people His Word long before Billy ever came along. He'll be teaching people His Word long after Billy gone. It's not name dependent. Realize that the will of God isn't dependent upon perfect ability. I can remember hearing back when I was going into real conservative Pentecostal churches, that's where I grew up and stuff like that. Heard preachers saying that when the rapture took place, God was going to go to the mission field. And if you were supposed to be in the mission field, He's going to look for you right there. And you weren't going to make it in the rapture because you were supposed to be in the mission field. People, shouting all over the place. No. No. God's got enough sense to know where you are.
And the mission field's around you.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you're supposed to be in the darkest part of Africa, even though, maybe 100 reasons why you're there, but somebody else thought you ought to be there, so therefore you ought. No. God's will isn't place dependent, isn't name dependent. God isn't stopped because you or I don't do His will. Now, God will use us as parts of His plan to reach others and reach other things in His will. Like I said, He might do it with us. He might do it in spite of us. He might do it through us. He might do it over us. He might do it around us. He might do it under us. But He's going to do it. He has decided. The question for us is, will we cooperate? Or will He have to work in spite of us? As He may have had to do with Elimelech. I don't know. Elimelech, I still think, probably he shouldn't have gone. But I don't know how Ruth would have come in. So, Elimelech, I appreciate the sacrifice. The sacrifice? What do you mean sacrifice? Because of not following God like you should, you're going to put yourself in a situation where you're going to die as a result of it. But God's going to bring Ruth. I appreciate the sacrifice. Now, to Elimelech, that may not feel much like a sacrifice. He feels like he's on the short end of the stick with that. And we do sometimes. We feel that way. But God is working what He has decided. It's not fatalism. And, let me say this. It's not, and I'll put thing, let that cover it all. Not thing dependent. God is going to do His will. His will be done. His will be done. We can cooperate, or He may have to work around us. See? Center A, center B. He may have to work around us. It'd be a lot simpler for us to have, But That doesn't often happen. So God's got to work. And He will work. Because there might be that point of salvation, or it might be that point where you've had all these chances and you blew it. You wouldn't take it.
And I think that's, part of the chasing process. He's gonna keep chasing you.
Mhm.
But in the end, he has a decision. He's decided on what he's gonna do.
Mhm.
And if you're not gonna bow
Yeah.
or come to him, then he's gonna move right on.
Yeah. When Paul said in Philippians or Colossians, either one of them, my birth certificate's catching up with me. One of those two books. Every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. You can either do it because you believe it and surrender, or you can do it because you're made to. But you're going to do it. Satan will do it. He still won't believe him, but he'll be forced to his knees. Just before, probably, he's cast into the lake of fire where the Antichrist and false prophet have already been cooking for 1,000 years. But he's going to bow. He's not going to accept it. He's not going to repent of it. But he's going to be forced to recognize you're King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now, where is the good God has for me in my situation? We've already noted that the attitude of Naomi was pretty sour. Husband dead, son's dead, no grandchildren, and I got an orphan Ruth. Great. And I'm in a heathen land. Wonderful. You can almost hear Naomi saying, God, I ain't seeing much good in this. And sometimes the good in our situation that God has is often right in front of us. As I said, as we've talked about. But I want to hit on this just a little bit more. Orpah, and especially Ruth, were part of her family. And this was a good that God had providentially planted into her life. The failure of God's people to see what He has placed before us is often just as much a challenge as the problem itself. Some examples of this. Remember when the Lord told Moses at the burning bush, I need you to go and deliver my people. Moses he gave at least 4 excuses why he couldn't do that. And one of the ones that, they ain't going to believe me. I ain't nobody. The Lord said, what's in your hand? What's in your hand, Moses? He said, rod. Throw the thing on the ground. Came a snake. He said, pick it up. Came his rod again. He said, take your hand. Put it inside your robe. Pull it out. It was as leprous as total infection could be. Put it back. Clean.
It's telling you to put it back.
Yeah, I bet he's saying, where can I put this? What am I going to do? Can I put it back? Moses, it's not about them believing you. It's about them believing me. I am going to be there for them to believe me. And even though it's going to take 10 plagues for Pharaoh to get the point, he's going to believe. And I'm going to leave the rest of his crowd floating in that, depending on which belief you have. Some people say it was the sea of reason, it was only like that deep, and some fella got to shout, and he said, and somebody said, well, why are you shouting about that? He said, because God drowned a whole army in ankle deep water. God's going to do his stuff. I believe it was the Red Sea. But be that as it may, what's in your hand? What's right in front of you that could be the instrument God is now using? In Matthew chapter 14 and 15, in the feeding of the multitudes, the 4,000 and the 5,000, all this crowd, his disciples saying, you need to send these folks over to Walmart. That ain't nothing here for us. He said, what you got? Well, we got this little boy that's got a couple fish and a few loaves of bread. He said, tell people to sit down. What you got right in front of you? The Lord will use what is right in front of us. Paul in Acts 18, verses 1 through 11. Paul in Corinth got scared. He got rattled. That's not something we often think about with Paul, but he was rattled. Of course, from what he talked about Corinth being, yeah, that's a place where you could get rattled. And the Lord spoke to him one night and said, listen, Paul, hang in there. It's all right. It's all right. I have many people in this place. It's right in front of you. Now you can look at the problem, or you can look at what I have in front of you and realize that I'm going to accomplish my will. You just need to work with me. In all of these, and there's other examples we could point to, God called attention to what was already in front of them. And in Him, they can bring good into the situation. Can we, and I'll have to wrap this up with this, can we not look at what good is with us now in our situation? What is God doing with you and in you? You have a situation. Maybe nobody knows about it, but you and God. And it's just messed you up in so many ways. But this morning, you have a strength in you that you didn't have before that ever happened. And you're looking at what's going on. What's God done in you? Well, I can trust Him more now than I ever thought I ever could before. I've had to. He's made me. He's got a point that He has decided. You might not would have gotten there. Like my wonderful little statement, you can't fix stupid. And sometimes, in order for God to fix our stupid, He says, I need to get you off of that point. It might take some of this to get it there. But I'm going to accomplish something in you that you never dreamed I would be able to do. You hadn't even thought about that. But I've done that. Think about your situation. Think about your life today. I can look back over my life and I can see a whole lot of stupid. I can look back over 50 years and think, had I made a different decision when I was 16? 16. I almost can't remember when I was 16. I just barely remember it. Like I told somebody the other day, I'm almost closer to 100 years old than I am 40. That's, that puts it in perspective. You know what I'm saying? If I'd have made a different decision then, how much total different my life would be today. In my thinking. Now this is me right here. This is a good picture of me. But as I think back, if I'd have made a different choice back then, my, how much I might have missed right now.
You may not be here.
Yeah. And I don't know of anywhere else in the world I'd rather be than right here with you good folks. I mean, that's straight up. If I didn't mean I wouldn't have said it. So when we think, well, I wish God would have, or I wish I had of, yeah, I understand that. But think about all of the Ruths that have come into your life and that you have been to people because of the things that have occurred. And see the hand of providence in you, through you, and around you. We're going to talk about this some more, but it'll have to be next week. Thank you.